What's up, fam? I'm Jazz, and this is Blackxecutive, a networking podcast for Black creative pros by Black creative pros, sharing inspirational stories, actionable advice, and giving away the game to succeed in your business and your career. Join the network where dreamers become doers and the aspiring become inspired. Listen and watch on blackxecutive.com. Let's get to it. What's up, Blackxecutive fam? I'm your host, Jazz, and welcome to season 2 of Blackxecutive Podcast. This season will be simultaneously streamed as a podcast and as a YouTube channel. So if you're listening on your streaming app, you can also watch us have this conversation on the Blackxecutive Podcast YouTube channel. Now let's get into our guests. So today we're talking to up-and-coming story podcaster Shay Potter. Shay has created a storytelling podcast, Crack This Shht Open, and it is fire, y'all. And it's about her experience accepting herself as a gender-fluid individual. Welcome to the show, Shay.
Thank you for having me, Jazz. I'm very excited.
Awesome. I'm so glad that we were able to sync. And immediately when I came across your story, I was like, oh man, I really need this. I need to hear like the inspiration behind this and the creativity that it took to put this together. So what made you decide to actually, like, number one, choose to publicly share your story and then to do so in a podcast form?
Right. So the first question, it was a bet. I'm a very quiet, shy, introverted person.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought of putting my story out there for other folks to listen to, it wasn't going to happen. So one of my friends that I was talking to about a year ago challenged me and said, you need to tell your story. Like, I don't have a story. You know, I just kind of do what I do. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
You have a story. You need to tell your story. And a couple months later, I had an episode where I tend to have them in the past, where in the middle of the night, I just woke up from the shudders of crying and not really knowing where that well of emotion was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got up and I said, you know what, I'm going to try to figure this out. And that was the beginning of what you're hearing in a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
of me trying to figure out what was that range of emotion that wakes you up in the middle of the night and you keep shutting, but your body is trying to let it out.
Mm-hmm.
And in exploring that, I recognized that I had some things that I was keeping suppressed, to include my voice and who I was. And that moment was literally like my body saying, I want to get out. I want to get out, right?
Yeah.
And that was actually the person who I call Sebastian,
Mm-hmm.
which is my more male dominant form that I spent so many years suppressing for the simple fact of trying to live within accordance, whether, you know, religion I was practicing,
Mm-hmm.
or the company that I was working for, or society, because I was trying to not necessarily fit in, but just not have the attention on me.
Right.
So that was the beginning. Started off with a bet, started off with exploring what was that well of emotion and why did it keep coming back? Hence, once I started digging into it, that's when I came up with the name Crack This Shht Open. Okay, I know there's something there. I got to break apart these boxes. They're holding me back. They are something that I need to get inside of and figure out what's there so that I can move on, become lighter, and finally reach my life's potential.
Mm. Yeah, that is phenomenal. Like, just going through that entire process and then how the name just came to you and everything, and kudos to your friend who convinced you to tell your story. Like, I love that so much. Sometimes we need those people to advocate for us in our own lives because we don't see it in ourselves, and other people see it. And I feel like he was, or she was, right on it, like with telling the story, you telling your story, because the episodes that I've listened to are so engaging. It's excellent storytelling, and it's exciting for me to see like where the storytelling podcasting industry side of the industry is going to go, because like you have like the effects in the background, you know, you're speaking your voice. You could tell, I don't know if you had any vocal training, but it seemed like you were like a professional like Audible reader or something. So like you really hit the nail on the head with it.
Thank you. And I actually put Jeremiah. He was part of the cast.
Mm.
He was in episode 1 and 3. And I remember maybe about 2 days, Jazz, I called him up. I say, hey, bro, I want you to meet me at this restaurant. I'm going to bring some mics. We'll attach them to our lapel, and we're just going to jump in. He was like, hey, what are we going to talk about? I said, I don't know. And I gave him kind of a gist, but he was like, shouldn't we rehearse or have a script? I said, no, I want it to be raw.
Yeah.
And I want it to feel like someone is ear hustling. They're in a table next to us, and they kind of hear a good little story, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, you know, and they actually feel like they are watching, listening to this conversation unfold. So I thought it was good to have him in there, for one, to jump off before I actually start jumping into the more depths, because he's been a really good, supportive friend, and I'm still pretty close with him today.
That's awesome. I love how you just like, it's like, let's just do it.
So
Let's
just
do it
do
on
it.
a whim. Let's get it done. And you just got it done. So kudos to y'all for like, just like literally meeting up somewhere and recording episodes. We talk about that a lot on this show. It's like this anxiety you have about getting stuff done and getting started with something. And the advice that like hands down, all the creatives always give to my listeners is always like, just do it. Just go do it. Get it done. Get it out the way. Cause you're never going to make any progress if you don't, you know?
I agree.
So while you've been working on, well, you're done with it now, but assuming like if you want to expand it or continue on, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey working on this?
Getting in touch with my emotional side.
Mm.
Again, that it's growing up for me, it was just important to exude strength, right? And crying and being all wishy-washy and into your feelings and talking about it. That wasn't my thing.
Right.
And this process of making a story, or letting a story out rather, was all emotional. It was all about getting in there, hugging it, laying down with it, tearing it open, cloaking your shoulders with it, things that I've never done with. Just sitting down and there was a couple of episodes, literally, I'm just crying on the page as the words are coming out, you know, and you're done and your page is soaked. That's episode 7. You know, when I was done with that, literally my page was soaked. And so, you know, for me, it was just whatever emotion that I was feeling, I wanted it to be inside of the words that I spoke, because I wanted whoever was listening, and specifically my target audience, to feel that, but also those that have not lived this life, but they know someone, and to be transported through emotionally, it takes you there, and it puts you in that mindset of, wow, I had no idea. And so just tapping into my emotions and allowing myself to open that door and be vulnerable with just myself. And then the big part was exposing that to the world. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You know, so rewarding was I became a better, fuller person by doing that, by finally opening that door and getting in touch with something that I had such a negative view about experiencing.
Yeah, I totally get that. Storytelling is so raw and vulnerable, especially when you're telling true stories and your story. So as a writer, I relate to that a lot because, you know, I had a similar journey as far as like trying to be okay with putting my emotions out there. I've always been a writer, but when I like, you know, got into the professional world and became a professional writer for work, I shied away from that because of the vulnerability that it requires to tell your story. And I was like, I'm still a writer. I just write for a living doing different stuff. And I kind of shied away from that creative writing side for a while. It took me a minute to return to it because of the amount of emotion. People don't realize how much emotion it takes to put your story somewhere on paper and on audio, anywhere. And it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. So what, with that being the most rewarding, what was the absolute, like, at this, were there ever any days, I'll say this, were there ever any days where you say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. I'm not going to tell my story.
No, and here's why, Jazz. Whatever I start, I have to finish. It just, I've already opened up the portal, right? There's no way I'm just going to leave it open.
Yeah.
We're going to finish this thing. I went in and I had to fill all these fillings and do all this stuff, getting in touch with my feminine side. Oh, there's to be an end to this. It was what I was thinking. Lots of late nights. It was hard. Taping in my closet, redoing the voice part of it. You're spending 6-7 hours getting it just right for your audio engineer to tell you, hey, sorry, this doesn't work. That's a whole day that you just put in. Yes, I wanted to throw some stuff.
Yeah.
So, but the whole time was, I've started this thing, I have to finish it. Not only just because of just more from a material standpoint of finishing something, but I felt that there was this transformation going on inside of me, and I had to finish it so I can get to the other side. Right? I was becoming a different person, or a stronger person, or however you want to look at it. And so I didn't want to short circuit that as well. So that was going on concurrently with me just trying to tape the words that I wrote, make sure that as I took time to write the words, that, those going to my editor back and forth. So yeah, you had those mechanics of it, but there was also a real personal side of something magical that was happening that I knew I couldn't short circuit. So I had to finish it.
Respect. Finish what she started. I feel that. Because of that, like you mentioned your editor, you've mentioned Jeremiah, and I know how hard it can be to edit a piece, especially if it's something that you wrote and it's about your story, and your editor's like, you got to cut this, and you're like, what? Or your editor's like, you need to add this, you need to expound on this, and you're like, this was a hard time, I don't want to talk about it anymore than I had to. So clearly you had a lot of vulnerability with the actual people that you worked with to get this done. So can you talk a little bit about your team and how you put that team together and how you work with them?
Sure. I had about 7 people that I outsourced different parts to. So I had 4 audio engineers. One was a sound design, because I really wanted to kind of have a movie feel to it. The others were what I call your baseline audio engineers, and really came down to scheduling, right? Because I had wasn't a tight schedule, but it was a schedule I wanted to stick to. And if an audio engineer couldn't work it because of whatever workload he had, then I had backups. And so that's how I made sure that the train was moving along and not hinged on someone that I outsourced to and it got backed up. Also had 2 writers along with myself. One was a creative director role. Her role was to ensure that we were developing the story arc and the story from beginning to end. Because the way that we've written it, each of the episodes were kind of written out of order. And it was really because it was a journal at first. And then we took that and then said, okay, hey, how are we going to line this up into a traditional story, a beginning, a middle, and end, so you can see the character's growth over time, and then see that they've transformed into someone and then learned something. So that was my creative director role. And then I had individual writers with me, where I would write what I call in a deep state, or a deep flow state.
Yeah.
Get up in the morning and just blah.
Yeah.
Or, just spit up on a paper.
Yeah.
Don't think about it. Don't try to figure out subject, verb, tense, none of that. Just get it out. And then I would send it to my writers and say, hey, I need you to massage this, but I got the crux of what it is that I want out. And that was a lot of back and forth. They would say, hey, what about this idea? Or what about that idea? Or what if we were to move some of the time frames around, you know? And I said, and it was just a lot of kind of back and forth on a whiteboard to get that story just right. So it was hinged on true events, but there were parts of it where we were like, hey, from a creative standpoint, we started moving things around for a better flow.
Yeah.
So that was very inexperienced, and I loved it because I learned more about story development and just how to kind of take a character through a journey, and that character being yourself, and then reflecting that where you can put it in a medium such as a podcast and put it in a position where someone who isn't close to that story can literally feel like they're now you.
Yeah. And
they're feeling the situation just as you felt it, which is the reason why I wanted to move it to a podcast form. I wanted to play around with that medium to see what a primarily audio story, what that experience will kind of be for the listener. And then other than that, I had, my parents were cast members and Jeremiah, and they each, I prepped them by saying, hey, here is a gist. I'm not going to give you, I just don't want it to feel formulated. I want whatever comes out, I want you to say it, and then we'll build the story. We'll bind the story together later. Because especially for my mother, if she knows she's on camera, she'll go into a mode where it feels really kind of formulated. And I was really trying to get her raw,
authenticity,
feel for it. On tape.
Yeah. Okay. I feel that. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying too. My mom will 100% go scripted on stuff like that. So I can't imagine. Yeah. So there was one thing that you said that stood out. You talked about like you as this character and having to get people to relate to that. Was there like, how did you have to separate Shay the character from Shay the person? Or, because it's your story, was it just always completely merged?
Right. So there's actually 3 Shays in this. And one of them is more Sebastian than Shay. So my birth name is Shayla, and I talk about that. That is just really kind of more of a business name to me. It's not something that I individually identify with, and that's why I kind of hinge on Shay. But throughout all the podcasts, there's Shay the narrator. And that is the guy. That is the one that is helping you as a listener, tell you, hey, look, I know everything that's going on. Let me position you right real quick, before it lays out. And it's kind of like the god of the story, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you have Shay, the character that is going through it. So like episode 2, when I am on the playground being taunted by my bullies, I don't know how that is going to end.
Yeah.
Right? That part of Shay is we're going through it minute by minute. I can't tell you I'm 12 right now. I don't know that at 40 I'm gonna figure this thing out.
Yeah.
Right now, I just need these kids to stop beating me up.
Right.
You feel me?
Yeah.
So I had to switch my mindset to get back there. Because obviously, I'm in my 40s and I know what happened, but I have to kind of go back to, okay, what if you're in a situation where you don't know everything's going to work itself out? Can you get that fear back again? Can you get that real pain back again that you felt when you were, 12, 13 years old? And so that's where my creative director and the writers that I was with, they were just grilling me to help me get back there and say, hey, we have to change this language because you're still writing as 42-year-old Shay instead of 12-year-old Shay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we worked it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then at the end of most of the episodes, you get another Shay that sort of, it's a kind of a combination of a God Shay and then 42-year-old Shay that's saying, hey, I've had time to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're sort of getting what I'm learning from this.
Mm-hmm.
So you get those three pieces of the story together, which is me essentially, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just different perspectives at different times.
Yeah. Like, how hard was that for you emotionally to have to go back to 12-year-old Shay? I know that wasn't a good time, for that, like the part of the story that you tell when you were being bullied. So how did you handle that emotion?
It was a lot of quiet moments because I thought I literally thought, Jazz, that I grew away from those feelings, but
Mm-hmm.
I found that, here we go, Crack This Shht Open, that
Yeah.
was a box that I created, stuffed those feelings into,
Mm-hmm.
threw the key away and said, I'm not going to think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing that, I never did like own it
Mm-hmm.
and, and try to settle it. And so by going through this podcast and finally doing that, it's like, oh my goodness, these feelings are just as raw as they were then.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do with that? And so it just became, Shay, you gotta let it go.
Mm.
Because you can't change it. Obviously, you're doing well in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen. It happened. It wasn't cool,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly, you gotta let it go so that you can just sort of reduce the load that you're carrying in these boxes. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's that growth part that I was telling you about, that was happening, where you sit down and it's like, I'm mad now,
Yeah.
but it's like, well, we're talking in the 90s. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of that conscious effort to say, I see that it happened, but I can't accept to continue to hold on to it where it's impacting me from getting after the things that I want to get after today.
Yeah.
I have to just let this go and move on.
Yes. Yes. And I know one thing that you spoke about in one of your episodes was like the support that you receive from your family and friends. And I'm sure having them in your corner, and then just knowing, even when you went through this process, like, people, they accept you, and unfortunately we hear too often about times where people are not accepted for just being who they are and by their own family. So I think all of us have the story of, if we didn't experience it, know someone who has experienced that, and that can be so raw. So how did
And
your
that's a process.
Yeah.
The closeness that I have with my parents today,
Mm-hmm.
and friends and family, that didn't come until I said, here is Shay /
Mm-hmm.
Sebastian. If you accept Shay, if you love Shay, you also love Sebastian. You don't get half. You're gonna take whole, or that's it. But that didn't happen again until my later years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I came out about 32.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from 12 to 32.
It's a long time.
You're just kind of holding it together and hoping, family included.
Yeah.
Also, as we started, I wasn't in tap with my emotional self. So sitting down and talking about what that wasn't going to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
my parents, friends, they just didn't know. Some suspected,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't really know the ends of the angst, the growing pains of it, the torment, the anxiety, all
Mm-hmm.
of those negative by products of holding something and trying to walk in existence that is not yourself, because you are ashamed of who you are, right? And so all of this is just kind of bubbling up inside. I'm not willing to talk about it. My parents and my mother are not aware enough to see that I'm battling with something inside. And then you just sort of get to a point in your life where you're like, I can't take it anymore. And say, okay, you know, I gotta start slowly sort of getting myself out there to sort of get this stuff out. So my mom and I are extremely close, but it's taken a lot of work. I grew up in, like most Black kids, in a traditional Black home. My parents were deep Baptists. You know, there were rules. My dad's an old Southern boy.
Yes.
Mentally, I'm more male than female. But for him, it's, you are a female child, and females belong in this box here to do these things here.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of disconnects growing up. And then my mom's a very prissy, refined woman, Northern woman, right? So almost think about Diana Ross, right? And so she has a girl child that's like not trying to be about that life.
No. You like a dress? So, no.
Right. So, you know, besides going to church and being screamed at, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily Shay, you're going to hell, but gay people are going to hell. And then growing up in a very traditional Black conservative home, it was a lot, you know, and so we had to kind of work through that to start having these more liberal conversations or progressive conversations about sex and sexuality and gender identity and things that, you know, most people kind of aren't very comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I can have those conversations with my parents now, but that took a while for us to progress to get there.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I'm from Arkansas, so I am from the South myself, grew up in a very Christian household. So all of this is like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Sex was not even a word in my house. Don't you ever even speak it. Don't speak it. Dating is not a word. Don't say it, you know? So I totally understand that tension and having to grow up under that and come into your own when you don't identify with those values that are being imposed on you in your household.
Yeah, it was, I have stories. I mean, it's my mom has, she's loosened up since she's gotten older. But it was tough.
Yeah.
You know, it was really tough. And I understand things from her perspective. That's another thing as a writer. I love stepping outside of my worldview. Even if I don't agree with you, I am going to do the drill to say, you know what? I just kind of want to see where Jazz sees the world. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I just really want to kind of understand why she's coming from the position that she's coming from, you know. And I would do that drill where it would just be, okay, what does Jazz think about this particular situation, and just kind of be in it, you know. And so I've done that with my parents. Still doing it, doing it with others. That's more of my process is, I just want to kind of come to the center, right? Not necessarily to change people. I'll never be able to change my mom's beliefs and faith, and I'm not trying to do that. I don't think that's the right position to come from. But if I can open her up to something that she's never been exposed or really kind of understand, whether she takes it on or not, it's just that process. It's just planting that seed that eventually it may become where she comes back to me and say, hey, Shay, you know, which is episode 6, where she's like, hey, I got some questions. And I almost had to stop the car. Like, wait a minute. when did we get this comfortable?
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
so I had to kind of look at her and like, okay, can you bring my mom back? I don't know who you are. But at the same time, you know, not push her back, just say, hey,
Yeah.
okay, you know, let's jump in. How, you know, I can answer your questions, you know, share whatever knowledge I have, and let's walk through this thing together. But at no point do I attack the very faith that she has, you know, because that's sacred, and I just don't believe that you really need to kind of go that route.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. I have similar parallels with my mom, and you know, she over the years she's gotten a little softer on some things, and you know, she's compromised with me a bit on some things. I think she's at the point now where she's kind of realized it's like, I don't ever want you to not believe what you believe. I just want you to accept that I believe what I believe. You know, it doesn't have to. It that's it. That's it. That's all I'm asking. Like, you can believe what you want, you know? So yeah, I get that. I get that. And maybe it's just like that Southern upbringing, those Southern values more so. And they say your mom's like from the North, but those Southern values that get instilled, especially like in the Christian church, Baptist culture. My goodness. How do you think your work with this particular podcast and your story has impacted the Black community?
So
Or
I'm just
will?
gonna put, yeah, I'm just gonna add to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a lot of work to do
Say
within
that.
the Black and Brown community
Mm-hmm.
as it relates to not changing your belief,
Mm-hmm.
but changing how we treat individuals that we don't necessarily agree with.
Yes.
And that's going to take a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
But my part as, you know, a Black gay person industry that I'm in right now, and that is the military.
Mm-hmm.
I am a senior military officer,
Mm-hmm.
and I come across many young privates, young officers that are still trying to find a way, just like I did. And to see their eyes light up when you do find someone that lets on that they are from the community, it's almost sort of sacred. And so I learned over in the short time now that I'm looking at retiring, I have to speak up more. I'm at the table. I'm in these senior positions. I'm in these rooms where I'm often the only diversity in those rooms. I can't afford to be quiet. I have to speak up, and I have to represent. And so as a quiet, shy individual, I didn't always take that challenge, but now I take that challenge. So that's number one. Number two, just being another voice to help others understand the perspective of where their child or young person or friend may be. Right? Yeah. So if I can get you for 19 minutes to take an experience from a playground of being bullied to wanting to do harm to yourself, all the way to coming out of it, right? Now I put you in a position where we can have a conversation. And that conversation is, I wonder if my child is feeling this way. How can I help?
Yeah.
Wonder if my neighbor, I seen they're withdrawn. What's going on? Maybe I need to go and say, hey, Billy, Sam, whatever, talk to me. What's going on? No judgment. Just talk to me. To me, I feel like that's all that, you know, there's a million things to do, but I just want to start that conversation to open the door for those kids and people in the process of healing and self-acceptance, and hopefully have them avoid taking, you know, almost 25 plus years to, you know, find their strength and their voice and to figure it out. How we short circuit that so that a young kid can walk boldly at 12.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's where I would like to take for the Black community, those
Mm-hmm.
young Black and brown LGBT youth and the loved ones around them, to sort of bring them together to sort of create that healing that needs to happen.
Yes. That is so important. Thank you for sharing that.
And I love processes, so
Uh-huh.
this should be fun.
Cool, cool, cool. Okay. So taking us through like your day-to-day of this storytelling podcast. I know you talked a little bit about like in the morning. In part one, you talked about in the morning, you just wake up and kind of go and pass it off to your editors. Can you walk us through a day in the life of Shay in the middle of creating Crack This Shit Open?
Okay, so this will be two parts. So one, I just want your listeners to know that I am a full-time active duty service member.
Mm-hmm.
So like most, I work from 9 to 4 p.m. and then, I can come in the evening and work. So when I was working this podcast, I had to work around those hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so structure and planning was absolutely critical. And so the first 2 months, I just wrote. I wanted the words out and to just explore. And so for the writers out there, it wasn't more so of me writing to see this thing from beginning, middle to end. It was, for example, I wanted to explore teenage depression and my teenage depression. And so I would sit down for about half a day and just write out what story came to.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would immediately send that to my co-writer, and she would work on it for a couple of days. And then we would get back together and then kind of go bounce back and forth like any other editing process. No, I like this idea. No, I don't like this idea. And then we finally shape it where it's actually a story. And then from there, so that would take about a week from that actual moment that I had written it. And then I would take about 2 or 3 days to sit down with my creative director and now format it over a story arc.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we already knew what themes we wanted to hit. We already knew not just crack the shit open, but the box is something that we wanted to have in each one of the episodes. So it was this analogy that we were carrying through. And then we also knew that there was going to be this revelation at the end. So we wanted to make sure that we were putting in little hints throughout, so that when you came to that end episode, it all kind of made sense for you. So I would say one episode, really from a writing perspective, took about maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks with the right people to shape that. From there, then I would transition over to the sound design. And so that involved 2 engineers, one where we will find the right music pieces that we wanted to use throughout, the right sound effects. And then we will take that script and essentially divide it into timestamps and figure out where should the music lie. So you can imagine that that's going to take a very long process.
Yes.
And it did. It took maybe about 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
Just to get everything just right. And then you had your episode. So that's almost about a month for one story to turn into an episode and get finalized. And so I did that for that system for each episode, and there's 8. And once I compiled them, then I found what I called a beta team of about 5 individuals. And I said, hey, I just need you to listen to this and tell me as a listener what's right, what isn't right. And so I market tested that, each episode tried to take it out the pitch, making sure the sound either carried the story or helped the story, things of that nature. And so I use, just like if you were writing a book, beta readers, I had beta listeners to help me with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I finished that process, then we took all of the episodes to go through one industry sweep where it met the right sound design and sound levels that any standard, Joe Rogan or Gimlet startup or any one of those big podcasts will go through.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole process from starting from journal all the way through to finalizing that episode took about 8 months.
Wow.
To get all 8 episodes together, market tested, and then just sitting there waiting for me to, upload it to broadcast to listeners.
Wow. What a journey. 8 months. Goodness gracious. Like you had to be dedicated. And like you said last episode, you had to like make your mind up, like, I'm going to finish this thing, because that's a lot. And there are a lot of individuals who were stakeholders in
Yes.
that. And, they had an opinion, and you wanted to, consider our perspectives. You did testing like that. And that just makes my heart so warm, me being like, I work in user experience. So like, testing is like, yes, please find out how this actually performs. And so like, and you don't hear about that a lot in the podcast world. People just usually just hop on a mic and just throw it up there, and then you figure it out later. But y'all beta tested beforehand and everything. So wow, like what a high quality production.
Yeah, it was a process. I still talk to each one of, I call them teammates.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew early I had to outsource and be comfortable with outsourcing.
Yeah.
Even though it was my story. But if you look at film, Shonda Rhimes or any other, filmmaker that may have a story, you got to put your baby out there and get other creatives around it.
Yeah.
That's just how it's done.
Yeah.
And when you get a room full of creatives and the ideas are just bouncing, it's magic. And it was just a really awesome process. So, if you're, someone listening to that, it's okay to put it out there in its raw form and have other creators help make it stronger, because it will be stronger.
Yes. And all effective art is created with collaboration. Like you can't just create in a vacuum, and you hear about this sometimes. You hear about this soul artists who locked themselves away for 30 years and like when they died they blew up, but most of the time you have to collaborate and create. It doesn't matter whose story it is. You need somebody's eyes on it, someone's opinion. You gotta bounce it off people. So yeah, glad you plugged that gem there. So while you were doing all of this, what tools were you using? Like, what are your favorite tools for writing?
I think you're going to laugh and your listeners are going to laugh. I used, drum roll please, sheet of paper.
Old school with it. Classic. I love it.
And you can't see it here, but there's this big, huge whiteboard that I have as a big visual. Mind mapping is huge for me. So
same.
I would start with the whiteboard to draft, how I saw the story, what key things that I wanted to take, capture that. And then I would sit at my laptop and write those parts. And so I kept it very simple. For one, as a creative, for me and everyone, I think most creatives are scatterbrained. And I don't mean that in a derogatory state. I just mean it as that's part of how we create by saying so many different things.
Yes, absolutely.
But if you want to get something done and on time, you got to find out a way to, put frames on that thing. And for me, putting frames and limiting the number of different tools and systems is absolutely critical for me, because I'll get lost. You start saying, okay, I use this program and I use this program, and I kind of go through that. I need something very simple that I can maintain, so it's not taking mental energy from it, and I can just focus on the creative. So for me, it was paper, it was my whiteboard, and then I would transfer over to my laptop, as far as Google Documents, and write out my story that way.
I mean, respect for that. Like, the only reason I don't write by hand anymore when I'm journaling is because I'm slow and I'm terrible at writing. I'm like, my family calls me the writer who cannot write, and I've said this several times before, but because my handwriting is horrible. So I can move faster if I type or text, like in a Google Doc, what it is that I need to get out. But yeah, old school pen and paper, like, and I always feel like that's like an editing hack that people don't think about. Like, if you start on paper, at some point in 2020, you have to get it digital. And so you're editing as you move it over from paper to digital. So you've already like gone through a draft just to get it electronic, So
I agree. I mean, ultimately, I like to get on that laptop when I start doing the deep work. But when it is just drafting those earlier ideas, it's just something for me of either a marker or a pen on a white paper. It just works for me to sort of draft out the picture or the idea. And then, like I said, once I'm ready to get those paragraphs going, I'm like you, okay, it's time to get on the laptop.
Yeah. I feel that. So while you're going through that, you figured out a workflow at some point. What is something, or did you notice any particular habits or behaviors that were kind of problematic in your workflow? And if so, how did you solve for them?
So with the timeline I created, it not necessarily a timeline, but the plan that I created, I knew what I was doing each day, and I tried to make it consistent. So every Monday I knew what I was doing. Every Tuesday I knew what I was doing. And again, this was just to kind of cut down on, hey, it's Monday. What am I supposed to do today?
Yeah.
It's like, it's Monday. These are the things that you do on Monday. These are the things that you do on Tuesday. And then after a while, 8 months of it, you're just flowing, right? So some things that were problematic, and they're just problematic even in my line of work. And it's just something that I have to sometimes take a step back because these are not my strong suits. So number one, I'm always wanting to attack the big elephant. And so what I mean by that is, oh my gosh, we're going to have to write 8 episodes. And so you fixate on that, and yes, you do. That is a monstrous task, especially when you don't even have a word written.
Yeah.
But then sitting down and breaking it down into small, manageable tasks. And then, like I say, parsing it out by day. On Monday, here's what you're going to do. And if you stick with that, like me, at the end of my 8 months, I tackled that elephant. But if I would have tried to do everything all at once, I probably would have struggled. So just being able to take a step back when there's a big, huge task in front of you, and it's almost too scared to start, to say, okay, get before a whiteboard, calm myself down and say, you know what, okay, let me break this down into manageable pieces. And then, that will be the start for me to get my momentum. And I forgot the other point, but I think that's the biggest one for me, because this was very overwhelming. It was my very first time. I've never podcasted before.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the equipment or the software or the lingo. I'd never written a story from a novel standpoint. And oh, by the way, I was managing a team and the crew on a timeline.
Yeah,
so
like day jobs. Yeah, people forget about that. Like, we still have day jobs most of the time,
Right, and I still had a day job.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of, it was overwhelming, and that's why I said, sometimes we get so fixated on the big elephant. I had to really just kind of calm myself and really kind of pull back and just focus on the one or two things that 2 tasks that will be easier to kind of focus on, get done. And then that way you can say, yes, on Monday I was able to do X and Z. That's awesome.
Yes. Yes, that's a great tip, like having a schedule. I have a lot of hacks for my writing process, but that's one thing I do not. I do not have a designated day of like, I'm doing these particular writing tasks on this day only. So I think that's a great tip for like all processes, but especially with writing, because it's so easy to like put stuff on the back burner or like get caught up and too deep into one story when you're supposed to be focusing on another. You'll be all over. Like you said, like we're scatterbrained. That's how our creative process works. But when it's time to execute, sometimes it can be a struggle. It can be a struggle.
Big struggle. Big struggle.
So with that being said, all that being said, what are a few actionable steps that you would actually give to someone who's like, look, I have a story. I want to create a storytelling podcast. How do I get started? Can you tell me a few quick things?
Yeah. So I would say in the beginning, and this is for any creative out there, but especially new creatives, creativity in the beginning is messy, is horrifying. It doesn't make sense. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And guess what? You just got to put your arms around it and embrace it.
Right.
So ultimately, that first step, being comfortable and just being around chaos. So that may mean you're in front of a whiteboard and you're on a train of thought of, okay, I want to write about X, and within 15, 20 minutes, you're on a completely different, azimuth somewhere that has no relationship about it. But throw that up on there. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is be okay in your chaos. Just get your ideas down. And there doesn't need to be any relationship values. Okay, that's part of that early process and being okay with that. And then after that is done, step away. Literally, step away. So I would, time my mom was living here with me, we would go walking. We would go shopping or something. Literally, I put it on the board what it is that I wanted. And I walked away to go do something else. And that was really to sort of give my mind a chance to breathe, right? And then, come back to it later. And so for me, later meant probably the next day or two, and then go back to that whiteboard and see which one of those things that you threw up there really speaks to you.
Yeah.
And then that is a thing that I will take some time to then start branching into if there's something there. And what I mean by if there's something there, is there any emotion there? Is there something about that is making me feel sad or angry or just really happy, right? If I'm looking at a word that I wrote and it invokes nothing, then I cross it out. Because I have to write from emotion as a writer, and so if there's nothing there, then there's nothing there. And so what I'm ultimately walking you through is kind of my process of sort of necking this thing down and getting sort of the idea right, where now you can take that and the emotion behind it and start building your story from there. The last piece is I was taught the traditional story arc. I don't have a name for it, but it teaches you the journey of a character and where they are. And there's about 8 or 7 changes that a character goes through to the end of where they're transformed. And I think it's called the story arc. I'm not quite sure. But that's what I use to start building my story around and then going from there. But it started from that whiteboard of just being comfortable with chaos and just throwing things up and it being ugly and knowing that later on it'll get refined to something that's pretty good.
Yes, that's so important. It's going to be ugly. It is when you get started. But in the end, it will be nice and polished, almost like chiseling away when you're creating a sculpture, But in the beginning, very messy, all over the place. I totally agree with you on that. So with you going through this process, did you pick up any particular reads? Do you have a current read or a past read, recommended read that you would like for listeners to check out?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, Jazz. And someone was talking to me about, what do I read, because they see that I'm such a creative writer and that I have such a vivid imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started telling them my read list, they're like, wow, that's so boring and technical. I don't know, I felt some kind of way about it, but
right.
So, but I can read computer manuals. I read, technical manuals, business oriented, real estate investing, and things of that nature, which is completely different than, me writing for podcasts or my Medium articles, which are more story oriented. So that's interesting how I have those two. But right now, at this very moment, I am focused on all things starting up a business and understanding the aspects of a business. So right now I'm focused on marketing. Donald Miller, he has a book about creating a story brand, how to tell a story.
Yep,
Right?
read that one.
Roger. And then all things Seth Godin. And the reason why I like these two, one is Donald Miller, I think everything is in clarity and being concise with your message. And that is something that I'm learning how to do, because I want to put all the flowery language and use all the analogies. And sometimes that loses people, so I like his method of being able to do that. And I think it translates very well for authors. To, after you spend all that time getting the detail, to come up with something very concise to hook the reader to come in and start, relishing in your work. And then I like Seth Godin because of his approach of, instead of marketing from the standpoint of these non-personable reasons, he's very fixated on kind of a servant style, which is completely my attitude of, how can I serve you? How can I make a situation better for you? Right? Because the transition is going to naturally happen, and it seems like, particularly in business and in the marketing world, particularly today in digital marketing and everything that is going on, everything is fixated on just getting the sale for the sale's sake and getting rich. It doesn't matter if you help somebody out or not. It's about getting that dollar. And so it was good to kind of find someone that can give you really kind of a walkthrough, excuse me, of the marketing trail, where you still can be true to yourself, which is being able to connect with people and hopefully make, whatever is going on in their world a little bit better.
Yes, those are both good recommendations. I spent a lot of time with story branding. Again, as I said before, I work in tech marketing. So, and I think he actually was a writer by profession when he created that framework, and then he turned it into a business strategy, because everything with brand, especially right now, it's about storytelling, and people want to feel like a brand is a good person, even though it's not necessarily a thing, a human, so yeah, I would definitely recommend that as well. So with us wrapping up, how can people find you to keep pace with your journey? We know that, like, you have the podcast, Crack That Shit Open. So can you tell us about that? And if you can mention your Medium and anything else.
Yeah, sure. And with the story podcast, that's just the beginning. I'm actually starting to work on the full novel. I'm going to call it a semi-novel. So right now, in talking to my editor, we're talking about fall 2021 to have that. So that's just going to expand the 8 episodes that you can have access to on any major platform, Apple, Google. Whichever you like, you'll be able to find the Crack That Shit Open podcast. And if you just want to follow me on social media, I'm on most of the platforms, but mainly Instagram, shayla.d.potter. And then, of course, my website, shayladpottermedia.com.
Nice. I'm so happy for you to like turn this into a novel. It's already like the framework is there, like the pot, it's just right there waiting for you. So this is going to be an easy win. Like, I know it's not going to seem easy at the time, but like compared to starting from scratch to, starting with already having so much of that groundwork done, I'm excited to see where your journey goes with this.
I appreciate it, Jazz. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I think this is absolutely wonderful. In you reaching out to other Black entrepreneurs, creatives that are doing great things in our community. It definitely does my heart joy to know that, folks are out there making things happen and most importantly, helping elevate our community.
Absolutely. Thanks for agreeing again to come on and share your story. I know like when you work so hard on something, sometimes at some point you're like, man, if I have to talk about this one more time, but it seems like you're still energized about it. It seems like you're still excited about it. So I'm glad I caught you while you're still like,
no doubt. No doubt. It's more about just helping others. That's what's fueling my passion right now. The parents and young folks.
Yes, I feel that. And I know that people are going to listen to your podcast and have revelations. I know I had some. So
awesome, Jazz. I appreciate you.
Thanks for watching Blackxecutive. Join the conversation in the comments below and be sure to like and subscribe. You can find a full list of all available podcast episodes on blackxecutive.com or wherever you stream. Until next time, keep aspiring to inspire.